The case that I saw that made me include that question was a girl at a public high school in Pennsylvania, as part of a religious ceremony, got a nose piercing. Um, I don't recall offhand what religion she practiced, but she got a nose piercing, which was apparently against her school's dress code, and was suspended from school and then sued the school on basis of separation of church and state. There was another case in Maine where an atheist sued a public high school for having the Ten Commandments hanging up in one of the classrooms, and I think the gym had a banner with a Bible verse on it. Would both of those, I guess, individuals have a fair complaint against their schools?
Well, I think the second part of that question, the issue of the Ten Commandments, this has been an issue that's been around for a long time, not only in the schools, but in the courts and that sort of thing, as you all know, with the Ten Commandments on the wall. And it's ended up, of course, in the courts, mostly because it's not that straightforward. Now, I've often said if you want to sort of use a series of legal codes, law codes, or whatever the case may be, maybe we should use the Code of Hammurabi, go back to something, or are we open to that? But I have to admit, I have my issues with having that in the context, unless it is being used as a part of understanding, legal codes, understanding ancient civilizations, and so on. And if it is, as some might argue, I'm perfectly happy with that in the context of others being, of course, expressed as well. The nose piercing, I think there are schools who would say that goes against our dress code. And it might very well be that, in fact, I don't know of this case, that the school in Pennsylvania might say, we have a code against body piercings that are visible. Now, does she have a case which says, because I know, for example, I don't think it's a religious thing, but I know, for example, even though it's become fashionable in our society, for Hindus, for centuries and centuries, the piercing of the nose or several earrings is just a part of a cultural thing. I think if this student could show that this is really part of a cultural thing, it becomes a much more difficult thing for the school to say you can't have this, in my view.
On that note, what is your opinion on how dress codes and legal mandates regarding attire can affect religious expression, not just within the U.S., but more broadly speaking? Certainly, a number of nations in Europe have banned the wearing of certain religious attire to varying degrees within their schools or certain public forums.
Well, I mean, your earlier question, Aaron, about can politics and policy affect religion? Here's an example. Clearly, after September 11th, a number of things have changed, not only in our society, but in the world, in terms of that affect perhaps how one dresses. And this ongoing issue, for example, in France, about the wearing of the burqa, about having that mode of dress, let's say, on a driver's license. Can that be acceptable? So all of a sudden, when you realize that there have been instances where, for example, one could, depending what one is wearing, as a religious garb, carry, who knows what in those garbs. It becomes, of course, an issue. Now, do I think that I have to admit, I grew up in a society that wore uniforms. And I cannot believe I'm sitting here thinking, that would not be all bad, where we have stripped away all of the differences, and this is who we are. But the truth of the matter is that we're not there. I think I think religious garb has to be respected, but at the same time, how do we hold together, let's say, religious garb that, for whatever reason, has been used, let's say, to create havoc in a public space, and how do we hold that intention with the freedom that I should be able to wear what I mean. So I'm not so sure, to be honest, how one comes down there. I do not want to give up the right. Now, if someone tells me that, listen, we have an issue with people wearing bow ties. We don't know what you have in that thing. I'm not going to lose any sleep over this here. I don't have a strong religious conviction about this. But what if in fact I am told that I cannot wear a turban as a Sikh? That really becomes, for me, a major issue. And or if someone says, you can't wear that turban here because, it creates fear among the general public because it's associated with X or Y. It seems to me at that point we have a problem, because one has to be able, legitimately now, to sort of historically wear something that is a part of who I am. Someone might say, I have to wear maybe, a particular necklace. I mean, I don't know. What if I'm an Orthodox Jewish person? Should I be able to wear the things that would sort of reflect what I believe? I think there is a place where one might say, we have to begin to say, okay, how does this individual rights fits in the larger context of a community that has other kinds of issues and other kinds of concerns? And it seems to me that that's the kind, at least that should be part of the discourse that one needs to have. How do I ensure that your rights as an individual is not being absolutely crushed, particularly if it's a legitimate thing, not for someone who just decide that, Snoop Dogg has just had an epiphany and now he's changed his name to, you've heard this, right? He's changed his name to Snoop Lion because he's become a Rastafarian. What if he says, as a Rastafarian, I need to sort of carry myself in this way or smoke in this? Well, how does one hold together that kind of, if you will, sort of right with the larger community? I think that's a conversation that I think one has to have, that institutions, that companies, that nations have to have. And some are, and I don't think there's anything that is necessarily easy about it. But nonetheless, it's a conversation that one has to have.
Do you feel like people like Richard Dawkins or Bill Maher have any kind of legitimate claim when they say that religion is slowing down scientific and social progress? Or do you feel like religion plays a role in accelerating scientific and social progress?
So I'll put it this way. I think it's an error to say broadly across the board, in general, it's sort of a general sweep, that religion slows down scientific progress. I just don't think so. Now, if Bill Maher says that I think there are branches of religion that seeks to slow down scientific progress, I would say, you've got my attention here, because I think there's truth to that. But the moment we make this broad, sweeping idea that I think that all religion and the practice of religion across the board in general slows down scientific, I don't think so. One could point to Einstein. This guy has written as much about God and religion and philosophy as he has about science. Actually, I'm not even sure if he hasn't written more. So I don't think in and of itself But when you have folks who say that the earth, as part of our society here, recently a congressman who is on the science and technology, I think,
is it Jim Brown,
right,
who's from Georgia, actually?
okay, who talks about the world 6,000 years and create that kind of perspective, I think, when taken and pushed, becomes really seriously problematic. And one could argue then that in fact, taking that perspective over and against what we have discovered and where we're going as a world that has embraced science, and so on, I think that kind of perspective, this idea that, what's it called, the Young World Society or something, the Young Earth Society or something, yeah, that's the kind of idea, it seems to me, that takes... so that's the kind of idea that someone like Bill Maher, for example, should be focusing on rather than make this general sweep. And again, let me broaden this and let me sort of break my own rule here by generalizing. In general, when we generalize, I think we begin a slippery slope to obviously include everyone, and then it leads to all kinds of unsavory things, not least being stuff like hatred and that sort of thing. For all of the good that we seek to do, and I hope there is much, refrain from generalizing. I think it shows a kind of an intellectual laziness when we do.